Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dr.Podcast, where today we're going to have this amazing episode with Dr. Kjemtrup, where she is a research scientist, veterinarian in California Department of Public Health. Hello.
Hey, hello.
How's everything?
Everything's going great. It's a great sunny day, and I'm so happy to be talking with you today.
Likewise, thank you so much for accepting to be our guest. How about we start with a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Okay, well, again, thanks for having me today. My name is Dr. Kjemtrup, and I got my PhD many years ago now at this point, in 2000. So it's 25 years ago. I had a kind of a long journey to that, as many people do, but it was not terribly circuitous, and we'll talk more about that journey. But I'll just say that in addition to having a PhD in epidemiology, I also have a degree in veterinary medicine and a master's in preventive veterinary medicine. So I have a lot of academic degrees after my name. And it has really been an interesting journey that I'm looking forward to sharing more about with you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So since you started by saying a lot of academic degrees, we will focus more on the PhD degree. Okay, so PhD in epidemiology. How about you share with us what initially sparked your interest in pursuing that doctorate degree in specific, in that discipline?
Yes, absolutely. So what I often tell people is that it's always good to have a goal, but not to go at it with blinders. And what the goal does is that it keeps you on a path. And without blinders, what you also do is look for opportunities. So I had an initial goal, probably since high school, to be a veterinarian. And as my journey started, I was really interested in wildlife. So my bachelor's was in zoology at UC Davis. And then I managed to get into the veterinary school, and also at UC Davis. And at that time also, I got married, and my husband's from Morocco. So suddenly I kind of had this new view of an international approach to veterinary medicine. So in that process, it became clear to me that I needed another degree besides a DVM. I needed to look at population level medicine. So that's when I got a master's of preventive veterinary medicine. And in that process, my topic there was looking at wildlife, specifically a tick-borne disease that we know was in bighorn sheep and deer in California. So for my master's, I was running around, jumping out of helicopters, helping out with California Fish and Wildlife, taking care of deer and bighorn sheep and things like that. It was very exciting. And researching this tick-borne disease. And towards the end of that process, suddenly we had 4 or 5 human cases of this disease. And that became of interest. And I could have easily stopped my degrees then and gone on into either, say, wildlife medicine or potentially some global aspect. However, and we'll talk more about the value of mentorship, but I had a mentor who came to me and said, you know what, you should write an NIH grant and see if you can't get your PhD funded as a professional, because I already had the DVM. So that's what I did. With her help, I wrote a NIH grant. It got funded, and suddenly I had a funded PhD opportunity. So a lot of good things fell and so it was really, this jump from wildlife to human that said this requires more research, that really said, yeah, I'd like to delve in that. I'd like to understand that more.
That's amazing. And by the way, getting an NIH grant is not easy at all. And I believe so many people in the scientific field know that. You mentioned something. You said, I think it's a professor and advisor that told you to go ahead and apply for a research grant, right? Or for a grant to support your PhD.
Yes.
So can we consider her as someone, as one of those who ignited that spark, or those that contributed to you shifting gears?
Absolutely. In fact, she was a incredible mentor. She was my mentor during my PhD. She co-authored everything. We'll talk about some of the a lot of the impacts actually was from her and her philosophy, and she remains a great friend today. And this is part of the process of a PhD, is that you start out in this mentor-mentee role, and the mentor's role is to turn you into a colleague. So then she and I became colleagues, and of course, friends along the way. So yeah, no, she was truly instrumental. Leading up to that, of course, I had other mentors and professors, like in my master's and in my DVM. But in terms of specifically for the PhD, Dr. Patricia Conrad is her name, was the one who was incredibly inspirational to me.
That's amazing. And you said something really, really important. A good mentor is someone who turns you from a student to a colleague. And I
Correct.
believe that not all supervisors have that, right? So that is why I believe maybe it's one of the things that we are always keen on sharing with prospective doctorate students is choosing your mentor. What do you think of that?
So, you know, it's a great idea if you could choose your mentor, but more often than not, you don't have necessarily that opportunity to choose your specific mentor for your PhD. And some of that depends on funding. I mean, I was incredibly fortunate, and I will acknowledge, yes, the NIH grant was, I mean, it was an incredible opportunity, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. But funding, and even particularly today, is very difficult, and it's very difficult for professors to find funding for PhD students. So you may end up with someone who's agreed to take you on and who will be a good mentor. But what you may need is to find additional mentors. So other people who can be on your committee, other people who can support you. And I now have taken on that role with PhD students who working at the Department of Public Health, cannot officially take on students per se. I can be on their committees and so on, but I can't support them financially or anything like that. So I need to look for professors at the university to support, and then we become a team, and then I still serve in that mentor role, even though I may not be that student's main mentor. So the key message there is you will look for mentors. You may end up with someone who can help finance your PhD, but they may not be your primary mentor. But always look for anyone who can help you
throughout the process, because sometimes I know that sometimes PhD supervisors or PIs, principal investigators, are a little bit challenging to deal with, and there are some cases where students at the end give up the whole PhD thing or idea because they're really tired or they feel drained. So it's very important, like you said, to find other co-mentors that can help smoothen out the process, or that can help boost the morale of the person and keep them going.
I will guarantee you, at some point in your PhD process, you will find yourself crying in somebody's office. Okay, it always happens.
I know.
I have seen it every time. Me, my students,
Yeah. Guilty.
everybody. It's part of the process.
That's so true. Speaking of which, this takes us to the next important thing that we wanted to tap into, which is the challenges that you faced during your PhD, and How did you overcome those challenges?
So challenges that come within a are always going to show up. So the first challenge that I faced is I wrote this whole NIH grant about pursuing and finding more human cases. At this point, we had 5 human cases, all within a reasonable amount of time. So we're like, okay, all we have to do is, develop these networks and find these cases and put out all this kind of stuff. And suddenly all the cases disappeared. We never got any more human cases. And here I had a whole IAH grant, kind of sitting on needing to clarify and identify the epidemiology of this new emerging disease. This phenomena is not uncommon. I had another mentor, Bill Risen, who calls this grantoprophylaxis. You write a grant and things disappear.
I love it. Grantoprophylaxis. I love it.
So what are you going to do? So I needed to look at a variety of different aspects of the disease. We continually looked for human cases, but in that process, then you work too on developing new techniques. I had to learn how to genetically characterize things. That was new, how to, do phylogenetic analyses and sequencing and this kind of stuff. I did a lot of small mammal work. So I was out trapping animals and trying to find organisms within the animals, because that was our hypothesis, was that it was going to be in the small animals in addition to the large animals. So the first challenge was that our major hypothesis was not working out, but we had a lot of minor and other hypotheses that we could work on, and also then focus on technique aspects to build up what was going on. So other challenges that that came my way, really, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, is you have a family. I had a family by then. I was married, and I had my son was young at that time, and it's a blessing and it's a challenge, and you just and we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that and approaches to it. But that can be a challenge, because you're spending long nights in the lab. You are spending long times away, actually, from the family. You have to go network with people. You have to, go places that, are going to take you away from the family in order to do the work. So that's a challenge. And then I would say, but you have to go at it with a really good attitude, because each challenge is also an opportunity. And if you look at it as a wall, then you're stuck. But if you look at it as an opportunity, how can I get around that? You can actually find a lot of interesting new aspects to your PhD that you didn't know. So I'll just cut to the punchline here. I had a PhD where I could not prove my major hypothesis. I could do some of my other aspects, and we'll talk more about collaboration, but I ended up with 11 publications out of my PhD.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
You can have these challenges, but with good mentorship and resources, I had good resources, you can surmount them.
And good outlook. I mean, basically, you had a great, you looked from a great lens, a positive lens, at these challenges. And like you said, you turned them into opportunities. And you mentioned something about having a family and a kid. I was in that boat, right? So I think that mothers, and we will not generalize, but don't you think that we as mothers tend to feel that we need to manage our time really effectively in order to be able to to attend to our kids' needs as well? And what do you think of that? Sometimes I feel that it's a good pressure.
Yes, I think as women and as mothers too, there are some challenges. And people told me, for a PhD, add 1 year for a husband, and add 1 year for a kid. and that was true. My PhD did take 6 years. It was not 4 years. It was 6 years. And that's okay too. But that, again, so yes, it made you learn how to manage your time very, very wisely. But the other thing is, my goal, and actually a lot of what I do, is take the family along. So
Yes.
I took my son out on field trips. He did small mammal trapping with me. He would be in the lab with me. So when appropriate, I mean, they can't always be there, but if we're going on conferences and we could swing a family vacation, we would do that. So they become part of the journey, and then they appreciate too a lot more what you're doing. But here's one of those challenges, right? Is that my son was 2 to 6 years during that process. And I remember, in the morning when they're little, they're really cute. And so you want to play with them in the morning and interact with them in the morning. And then I had to take them to daycare. So that meant that I got them there like 10. I didn't get into the lab until 10, 11 o'clock. So again, this is where the mentor was very helpful. She too had a family. She too was managing 2 kids. So she got it. There was no requirement for me to be in a certain time. The requirement was to get the work done. Mm-hmm. So the result was that, I'd get him in to daycare at 10, wouldn't pick him up, at 6, either me or my husband would pick him up, but then it's dinner and whatever, you got to put him to bed, read stories. By the time 9 o'clock rolled around, I had to go back to the lab. So then they're back in the lab. So it's, it is extra work, and you just have to realize, that's the way it's going to be in order to do that.
I believe things that are worth it are worth some sacrifices. And yeah, it will definitely not be like a straightforward or an easy path or journey. It will have all its ups and downs and challenges. So,
and I think the word you said there is critical. It's a journey. It's not a destination. It's a journey, and that's you keep that in mind. Then you don't get desperate sometimes. Oh, you will get desperate, but
of course. I mean, oh, come on, it's a doctorate degree journey, so yes, for sure. Yeah. There would definitely be moments of being extremely desperate and wanting to give up, and what did I do to myself here? It's like, how on earth was I saying when I took that step? Yeah. But then you realize eventually that, it's worth every moment. Uh-huh. Which brings us to maybe if you can describe a memorable interaction with a mentor or a colleague that helped influence your approach to research or your path or the rest of the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is with my major advisor, Pat Conrad. She had always maintained and always said to all her students, challenge the dogma. So, when you study a certain field, there's a certain amount of people who've laid the groundwork, and you need to respect that. But you also need to recognize that things can change when techniques change or when tools change. So, for example, in one of our collaborations, we were studying, or we needed some molecular characterization of this species I'm studying, Babesia, or this genus I'm studying in dogs. At the time, there were thought to be 2 main species of this Babesia in dogs. And with the molecular genetic characterization that I did, I said, no, there's not. There's 3. And so, and she said to me 2 things. That's great. You're challenging that dogma. Now prove it to me. And so, sure, I had the data, but how can I take that data to the next level and write it up and prove it to me, to prove it to her? and she was one of the ones who laid a lot of the groundwork in one of these parasites. So I proved it to her. And then my next challenge was I wanted to name this new species I found after her. And she didn't want it named after her because first of all, then she doesn't get to be on the paper, because rarely do you put your own name on a paper that you're named after. So I had another solution for that. Said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to name the paper, and then we're going to correct all the epidemiology behind it in a second paper, which you can be on. So
Oh my God, okay.
So, not only did she inspire me, but I was able to name a parasite after her, and I was really excited about that.
That's fun.
Yeah.
And apparently she was excited as well.
Yes, she was, actually.
Somehow, yeah. I mean, it's a sort of appreciation. I think any mentor would always, that is why mentorship and teaching in general is rewarding, I think. It's because of seeing appreciation in the eyes of our students or mentees, and seeing how appreciative they are, right?
Well, it's not just the appreciation, but to see that I picked up her challenge and ran with it. And so that's part of that, to seeing that development, that's part of that journey to colleague, right? Is to be able to do that.
And I think it takes grace from mentors and PIs to to sort of be able to take you from a mentee to a colleague. Again, I know so many stories where PIs don't usually accept that idea of, oh, you're going to become a colleague to me? Oh, no, I don't see you this way. I'll always be or a mentor, which I think, I mean, until this day, yes, I'm considered, let's say, a colleague to my PIs, my previous PIs, whether during PhD or a postdoc. Nonetheless, I'll always consider them mentors.
I think that's true too. So I still look to her for advice because she has a lot to offer. But now she'll call me up. She'll and talk about certain things. Or as she got away from that research field, I remained active in that research field. So when people would email her, she's like, can't answer this anymore. Let me send it to you. So that's really also the aspect of passing it on, and then you have to pick it up. It's not just it's not just your own feeling of, okay, now I'm a colleague, but you need to behave as that as well. You recognize in your own self. And a lot of people themselves have a hard time recognizing I'm no longer a student, but in fact, I am a colleague. And so it's a two-way street, I think.
Yeah.
I think you need to develop the confidence, and that's part of the mentor role, is to develop that confidence. And then it's part of the mentee's role to take that confidence and to act with that confidence.
True. And we are our own advocates at the end.
Correct.
Yes, our mentors are important in shaping how we will end up being somehow. I mean, they would contribute to that, but at the end, we need to be our own advocates, whether we're PhD students or postdocs and so on. That's so true. So you mentioned that one of your mentors, I'm not sure if both of them or if a couple of them were mothers as well. Did that help you? Did they share with you some techniques, some ways where you can have this work-life balance? And it's not mainly, it is work. PhD is work with being underpaid.
So I think, funnily enough, actually, my PhD mentor did not share with me her techniques per se, but she looked at what me and I had a lab tech at the time, and he also had a kid. And our kids, we could get them to bed. We could do this. She's like, "What are you doing?" So she actually looked to us to see what we were doing. But more importantly, is really this idea of balance. I don't think there's such a thing, actually, because sometimes work is going to be way more uh, requiring than family. But I think what you have to always keep in your mind is, am I giving people and my work and such enough of my time? And so I didn't really learn techniques per se, but what I had got from her, and then also I've been very fortunate in my career, my professional career in the state, is to have a female boss who's also been a mentor in my field. And she had kids and family. And just seeing that they could and they did was inspiring. And plus, they also, again, as mothers and professional women, could give grace to me. I get that you have to run off to a kid appointment. I get that your kid is sick. And so, I have heard horror stories about, and I'll just be frank, of women who've had male PIs who don't get that. Why can't somebody else take care? Why can't you get somebody else? Well, why can't you doesn't work sometimes with moms, because the kid needs you as a mom. So I guess, just seeing these women succeed, and here I finished mine in 2000. They got their degrees way before me, in a time when there were very few women in that area. So just seeing them succeed and their families do well, in and of itself, was an inspiration.
Definitely. And you mentioned something really important, which is that sometimes PIs, for instance, males, right? They don't realize how hard it is to juggle being a mother and doing a PhD. But believe it or not, there are also, and I experienced it personally, there are females, that dedicated their lives to science and research and work and education, which is great because it's their choice, that are also in the same. They look at women that have family from the exact same perspective. They don't even prefer hiring or getting mothers as PhD students, because they feel that, what, I am used to students that work overnight or, they dedicate their whole time to do research, and there's nothing else that they should focus on except doing their research in my projects and working on their PhD and so on and so forth. So what do you think?
I'd say that's absolutely true too. So I mean, again, more and more we can't box that sort of thing. Fortunately, also today, there's a lot more awareness of the value of women and mothers and families working. I mean, also there's dads out there who are working on PhDs, and dads are more and more active in their kids' life, and they require time too. So, and they face also some of those same challenges from, people who may not have had families or don't are not giving that grace for that family time. Fortunately, there's actually rules and regulations now that,
yes,
that can be helpful, but it's better if you don't have to go that route, and instead, I mean, and again, you mentioned choosing a mentor, and as much as you can choose, I think what's important is in the process of seeing who can help advise and be part of your journey, that you make it clear what your values are. And if family is a value and an issue in your life right now, you need to be very clear at the get-go and say, I have this and that, and these are my values, though I recognize that doing a PhD and doing that PhD work is going to require above and beyond anything, I've ever done before. So, I mean, again, it's the two-way street. You have to be willing to give that extra time. Like, I had to go back to the lab after 9 p.m. and sometimes work till midnight waiting for a run finished. But at the same time, be willing to say, I got to take a few days, my kid's sick, that sort of thing.
Exactly. This brings us to the next question, which is, what advice would you give someone considering pursuing a PhD in your field in specific and a PhD in general?
So I'm going to start with the general, and that is that when you do a PhD, you do a PhD because you want it. You don't do it because you think it's going to provide you necessarily a job. Your job prospects, yes, granted, are expanded, but it's competitive out there, and it gets more competitive all the time. So, the job I ended up with and the career I ended up with did not require a PhD, let alone a DVM. However, I have created it in such a way that they're going to have to look for somebody with a DVM, at least if and when I leave. Well, I will eventually retire, but so I mean, you're doing it. You do a PhD because you want to develop yourself as a researcher, as a person to take on this, and it's recognizing that it's not an easy path, but it's going to be a very satisfying, hopefully in the end, but difficult path. But it's quite an accomplishment to do, and you do it for you. So that's my first general piece of advice. Then for specifically in my field in epidemiology, my advice there is to find programs that are suiting your area of interest. So, for example, at UC Davis, it's the epidemiology degree is very computationally heavy. You learn quite a bit of R and SAS and statistics and
SPSS.
Yeah. So it's a lot of it's a lot of classes actually. Other people who do PhDs in epidemiology may want more theory. UCLA, for example, is very strong in epi theory. And so that might be where you would want your PhD. So, so specifically in my field, I would recommend people to kind of evaluate, again, coming back to your values and your desires, what part of this field of epidemiology is most interest to you, and then look around for the programs that are most suitable to what is of interest to you.
Mm-hmm. Which is a great piece of advice because sometimes people are drawn into specific disciplines or fields just because they heard that, oh, that's a great field, okay, let's go and pursue a degree there without them digging deeper into it. And others, for instance, pursue a PhD in general because of the prestige. Oh, I want to be a doctor, it's like, oh, that's very prestigious. Yeah. So what do you think of that? I mean, do you think it makes it more challenging?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to taking a moment to recognize why you're getting your PhD. I already mentioned that you don't go into it because you think suddenly you'll have all these jobs at your door. That's not going to work. You don't go into it. The prestige part, there's a lot of PhD folks out there now, so it's an important degree to have. Does it carry prestige? I don't know as much. It depends on the field, I guess, And then the other reason why you really don't want to do a PhD, and unfortunately I did see some of this, and even a master's, I would agree to say this as well, because you don't know what to do next. I've seen some people who say, oh, I don't know if I want to go out into the job field, or I don't know. I'm just going to stay in school and get another degree. That is a recipe for disaster because you don't have a motivation. You don't have a desire, a drive, If you don't know what your next step is, if you don't if you think that a graduate degree may help you identify your next step, that's when you need to start doing the research and finding mentors in the field and talking around. And I talk to a lot of students, by the way, and that's through the folks that I know, students will approach them at the university and they'll say, "Oh, you should talk to Anne." And I'm always open to talking to students. I'm so happy to do that. And the reason why is because anyone who wants to talk to me is thinking about their journey, and I really want to support that careful thinking.
Because it's not a short journey. It's a journey that is full of challenges, ups and downs, like we said, and they need to make sure that they want to start that journey before stepping into it.
That is, it's true. It's true.
Yeah. Okay. So since we talked research and, different projects, this means collaboration. So what role do you think did collaboration play in your PhD research, and how do you feel it impacted your outcomes?
Yeah, so collaboration in my research was huge. As I mentioned, my primary hypothesis was basically bust because we didn't have a human case until the very end, by the way. That's another story. We actually had another case. But by being able to collaborate, I was, and how did that happen? Again, through my mentor. She had a large network of people who were working on this parasite, and I was developing a new tool as a PhD student on how to characterize these molecularly. So we had collaborators from Oklahoma, from South Africa, from Kenya, from all over the world, and with that, I got samples that I helped characterize. Sometimes I'd be on a paper, sometimes I'd be in the acknowledgments. It kind of depended on how much work I did on it. But that collaboration helped establish my expertise in that area. And again, when we're talking about that journey from student to colleague, how are you interacting with other people in the field? And so that was definitely the role I played there too. And that's actually what helped contribute to getting all these publications I got with my PhD research. So collaboration is key. And where I have seen that pay off too is that now I still have a finger in this research, but I'm at the state, so I can't do this research per se. My professor has retired, so she's not in there, but we have shared these parasites specifically with other researchers. And one of the researchers is at Yale, and he's done a tremendous amount of work with these parasites, and he's a huge collaborator, and he's shared them. He's taken what we shared and he's shared. And from the work that he's done, he's actually developed new systems and potential vaccines and things like that. So, collaboration is really key. And, a lot of people feel like, well, if my name isn't part of a 3-author paper, then that paper isn't really that important. For me, I'm on papers that have 15 authors on them, because everybody has done some aspect of that work, and that's okay. And that's still important, even if you get a lot, because you're going to be in various levels in there, first, last, middle, whatever. But as your name shows up continually in this topic, you are getting a name. And so collaboration is really key in not just advancing your own career, but advancing the field, which is essentially what your goal is to advance the whole field in this area of research you're interested in.
Exactly. It's not about monopolization of the idea, because some people fall for that, right?
I've certainly seen it in my field. People who say, well, I'll do this, but I need to be this number on the publication, or, I'm providing you this critical piece and therefore I need to be on there. And it it takes away from the advancement of the field,
So
is my
true.
personal feeling of that. So to me, and actually also collaboration is easier. I've actually had people say, I want to put you on this paper because you provided me this. And I'm like, that's not worthy of publication. You can put me in an acknowledgement, but really, I do not need to be on there, And then, and I've had others do that to me as well, which, that's really what's taught me, don't do it again for, just getting your name out there. Think about what contribution are you actually making,
Exactly. It's like, unfortunately nowadays, the paper mills also, this is another issue.
Yeah, and I'm fortunate that publication is not a requirement in my field, even though I do publish regularly still. But yes, and that has to be acknowledged too, that there are people who are in positions who have to have papers. So even if they aren't making the great big contribution, again, it's going to help them. It's going to, and so if you want to work together, okay, I'll put your name on the paper. Great,
So it's sort of a compromise, compromising, right? In
Right,
order to have sort of a win-win situation.
right.
And at the end, it's all about the researcher's consciousness. It's like,
Correct.
will you sleep at night happy knowing that you did not contribute that much, but your name is there? It's like, it's like also mentors sometimes and PIs as well, doing sort of things that would sabotage their students' research work. There are all sorts of, the PIs, I think, are on a spectrum. You will find great ones and you will find not really great ones. And it all depends, like you said. Unfortunately, we cannot pick and choose sometimes.
Yeah, and I've heard horror stories, and as a result of those horror stories, I'm exceedingly grateful for my experience.
Definitely. I heard a lot of horror stories as well. So yeah, definitely. We were lucky with our mentors and PIs for sure. So this takes us to the last question, which is, looking back, what are you most proud of achieving during your PhD journey?
So I am most proud of, specifically in my field, and this may get a little technical, but at the time, doing molecular sequencing of these species was new. So I was able to molecularly sequence specific markers that, and then you have to do an alignment in order to do a phylogenetic analysis to see how they're related to each other. And I recognized that had to be done in a 3D manner, that the interactions of the molecules are going to impact how you're going to align these sequences in order to see how they're related to each other. So I developed kind of a standard alignment that was used, and that's how we were able to collaborate with so many people. They were like, oh, throw my parasite in there, throw my parasite in there. So that had an impact. I never wrote that specific. It wasn't a technique, but it could have been written up as a technique. I never wrote that up. But since then, there's been way more advances, way more different ways to characterize these parasites. And what I'm proud of is that the outcome of my research still remains the same. So I want people to challenge my findings. I want people to find them wrong, and so far, even with all these new techniques and everything like that, my findings are standing. So
that's amazing. But it's also amazing to see that you wanted people to challenge your findings.
Oh yeah. So then, the other thing I'm exceedingly proud of is that, so when I finished my PhD, one of my goals was to find the tick vector, the species of tick that transmits this organism. And I couldn't do it. And I had done tons of experiments, and to a certain extent, I wish I wrote them up. Ooh, here's another lesson. Negative data is good data.
Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes. So I should have written up, this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this
Yes.
didn't work. So it wasn't until I was out in my new job, out in the field, and I was with a biologist who pointed out a certain tick vector that I had not, investigated. And then I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, that tick makes perfect sense, and I never investigated it. So then I spent the next 10 years, whenever a researcher was looking for a position, a project, and came to me, or even if they had a student who came to me looking for a project, I'm like, okay, I can't do this because I'm at the state we don't do research. We don't do primary, this kind of basic research. But you could. And here's my hypothesis. You could take it. You can make it your own. I
That's
really want
amazing.
to do that. So I found this researcher at San Francisco State, and she had a student who was doing a master's degree, and she had the wherewithal, she had the money, she had everything. So I'm like, let's do this. And so we helped facilitate that research. I became an advisor to that master's student, and we ended up 10 years after my PhD identifying the tick vector in a way with tools that I actually didn't even have at the time. And
That's great.
so, that was a huge accomplishment. I felt like 10 years after being done with my PhD, I was like, okay, now
Now the story is somehow complete, right? And it was through generosity. I have to tell you, that's generosity. This is true collaboration. That's the essence of collaboration, and paying it forward, and sharing with others ideas, and being okay with them running with it, instead of being
it's the passion for the topic that you're dealing with.
yes.
I really want to know this answer, and I don't care if I do it or you do it or somebody else does it. Just do it well, and I want to see the answer.
Exactly. It's very important. And I think more and more people need to think of this, need to think of collaboration this way, and of sharing ideas and research ideas in specific this way, because this is how advancements in research will continue. Otherwise, if everyone is like, oh my God, that's my idea, this is my baby, no one is allowed, I need to do it, and time will pass, and then nothing will be done, and ideas will just be put in the drawers, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's great and very inspiring. And I don't know, I mean, I've learned a lot from this episode and from listening to you and your story. And I believe that the listeners would also want to hear one last message from you, about, or let's say, another maybe piece of advice for prospective PhD candidates, or even current PhD candidates, or doctorate candidates, because I mean, it's not only doctorate holders are not only PhD, right? There is the doctors of engineering, education, and so on. There's doctor of medicine, doctor of pharmacy, dentistry, veterinary medicine, right? So all these are doctorate holders, basically. So one last piece of advice that would inspire them and keep them going, for those that are already pursuing it, and also for those that are thinking of pursuing a doctorate degree.
So again, I think I will reiterate my earlier statement about having a goal. So be inspired by whatever goal it is. If you see something that you think is just cool, you hear a podcast, you're like, oh, I think that's cool. Go and try to find people in that field, and talk to them. Go out to coffee, find out, do a Zoom call now. We can do that, and find out, what is your job like? Do you like it? What do you do? What was your journey? Do this kind of stuff. Listen to people's journey. Then if that's what is inspiring you, and you still have that, and it sparked something in you, then go for it. And then my other statement is, don't go at it with blinders, because what that means is you need to look for those other opportunities that can come up. And And that's what opens doors to collaborations. That's what opens doors to new ideas in fields, and be willing to take risks. There's nothing that is going to come without risk. Like I mentioned, I had a ton of negative data and a ton of negative, and it did require a lot of resources, and I should have written it up, didn't. But point being that it didn't give me my answer, and you can't get stuck in what doesn't work. And in fact, actually, maybe step back and say, maybe the fact that this didn't work and it seems like it should have is of importance. So, so maybe my other piece of advice, again, coming back to what I said, is look at those challenges as opportunities.
That's amazing, Dr. and Kjemtrup. Thank you so much for your time and for your amazing insights and the great inspiration that you brought to Dr.Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Thank you.